Hey, this one's working on composition of trig functions. Before I go ahead and do some of these examples, we need to remember that sine, cosine, and tangent inverses, they have restrictions. These are the restrictions. Sine and tangent inverses are restricted to quadrant 1 and 4, whereas cosine inverse is restricted to quadrant 1 and 2. These are the restrictions that the inverses follow. Why they have these restrictions, that's explained in a separate video, which is the basic video of understanding inverses and what they mean. So feel free to watch that video if you're not quite there yet, or else please understand inverse questions have to follow these and restrictions on the domain. So let's go ahead and get started with the first example. Okay, we're having composition functions, so which means obviously we're going to have more than one function. So if you look at this example, this one's saying sine of cosine inverse of half. Just like in composition functions, if there are more than one, we've got to start with the second function, the one on the inside. So in this case, we've got to start with this part first. Now remember, when you look at this inner function, it's an inverse function, which means we have to follow this restriction with it, the cosine restriction. We can only have our angle restricted to quadrant 1 and 2. How do I figure out which one is which? If you look at the ratio here, that's the ratio. The ratio is positive, which means cosine value is positive. Now in the first quadrant is where cosine value is positive. In the second quadrant, cosine is negative because we're to the left of the origin. That's the origin here. Positive x value, negative x value. So clearly quadrant 2 is out. We must be in quadrant 1. So you can go ahead and construct your angle there, complete the triangle. Let's go ahead and label our sides. Because this is cosine, the definition of cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, which means 2 must be the hypotenuse and 1 must be the adjacent. That will help me label the sides, adjacent and hypotenuse. It's the 1, 2 type, so this must be root 3. If you recall our special right triangles, 30, 60, 90, the side opposite to 30 is 1, hypotenuse would be 2, and the adjacent side would be root 3. I'm following exactly that. Don't forget your other special right triangle, the 45, 45, 90. This is 1. If this is 1, then the hypotenuse would be root 2. So that's what we're going to follow in most of these questions. Once I have this, all I have to do is now find sine of that angle. So the answer to this is the angle. Now, have I figured that angle out? Technically, if I know unit circle and if I have it memorized, we should be able to tell what this angle is. This angle is going to be the one opposite to 1 will be the 30 degree. This would be the 60 degree angle, and then that would be 90 degree angle. You can do it that way, or you can simply say to yourself that the triangle is in front of you. All you have to do is find sine of that theta angle now. Sine is opposite over hypotenuse. Opposite is root 3, hypotenuse is 2, and we are done with the question. All right, here's example 2. If you notice, the inverse question was on the inside. So let me give you another one where the inverse is on the inside. Then I'll switch to the other way around. Sine inverse, let's say negative 1/3. And we have to try and find the answer to this. All right, when you look at the inner function, it's an inverse function. Remember to follow the restrictions. The angle, and the answer to this will be an angle, like sine. The question is basically saying sine of what angle is equal to negative 1/3. That's what we're trying to find. All right, this ratio is negative. That's the ratio, it's negative, which means we can't be in the first quadrant. We got to be in the fourth quadrant. All right, here's fourth quadrant. Draw your triangle, label the angle. Opposite, negative 1, hypotenuse 3. Clearly this is not one of the 30, 60, 90 or the 45, 45, 90. So I'm going to use Pythagorean to quickly figure out the remaining side, which would be 3 squared minus negative 1 squared to get that B side. So minus would stay as minus. I just caught my error. Yeah, that would be minus 1 squared, which is root 8, which is 8. So b squared is 8, or b is equal to root 8. Now this is a radical that can be simplified, because 8 can be written as root 4 times root 2. And clearly root 4 is 2, so 2 root 2. That's the simplified form of root 8. Hence, I'm going to go back here and label that side. That side will be positive because I'm on the positive side of x-axis. Now the question has turned out to be the cosine value of that angle. Do I know that angle? I still don't know that angle. At this point of time, you don't have to find the angle. All we have to do is find the cosine of that angle, and cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. And this one's already simplified. 2 1/3 cannot be simplified. Radical is in the numerator. We are done. The answer to that question is 2 root 2 over 3. Interesting question that was, because it was one of the non-special right triangles. Okay, let's look at example 3. Let me give you one where the inverse is on the outside. There we go. If you notice, inverse is on the outside, which means the answer to the inner function will be the ratio, which means that's the angle, and the answer will be ratio. So this would be ratio, and hence we have cosine inverse of a ratio, which means the overall answer to the question will be an angle. It will be an angle answer. Over here, we had ratio answers. That's a ratio. That was a ratio. Both of these were ratio answers. This one will have an angle answer. I hope that makes sense. It's important to know what's given and what type of answer to expect. So let me rewrite the question. All right, tangent of negative pi over 4. Negative pi over 4. Pi over 4 is 45 degrees, if you can collect that, which means this angle is a negative 45 degree angle, which automatically takes us to, over here you can call it positive 45 because the negative has been taken care of by the fact that I went in the opposite direction. So if you notice, this triangle is a 45, 45, 90 triangle, which are the easier ones, right? This side is 1, that would be 1, this would be root 2. See if you can find my error. Like, I haven't really finished it off correctly because we're below x-axis, so this must be negative 1, right? So the angle, this answer is the ratio. So let's go ahead and continue. Cosine inverse of, what's the ratio? What's the tangent of negative pi over 4? Well, tangent is opposite over adjacent. So all of this melts down to just that, if that makes sense. Right? Tangent of negative pi over 4, well, tangent is opposite over adjacent. I put that down. So the question has now converted into cosine inverse of negative 1. That's what it has boiled down to, which means I'm looking for an angle where cosine value is negative 1. And that takes us back to our quadrantals. 0 degree would refer to 1, 0. 90 degrees, because this is a unit circle, all the quadrantals are 1 unit away. This would be 0, 1. This would be 0, negative 1, that point right there. And this point right here would be negative 1, 0. So the question is asking me at what angle is cosine value negative 1. This is where cosine value is negative 1. And hence, this is the angle that's the answer to the question, 180 degrees. Cosine inverse negative 1 is 180 degree, or pi. How do I understand this question? The question is asking me, hey, cosine of what angle is negative 1? And I found that angle. So the answer to the overall question is pi, or 180 degrees. Like I said when we started, that the answer has to be an angle answer.